My pleasure to welcome you all to the start of our first Wednesday talk. My name is Brett Chilcott, and I'm the host. Will be hosting the talks during this week, along with Straight Nature and Kirstenbosch. None of this would be possible without Straight Nature, and Straight Nature is the leading specialist natural history publisher in Southern Africa, and is associated with the best-selling and most highly regarded field guides in the region. Straight Nature publishes full-color illustrated books across a variety of subject areas, including birds, mammals, reptiles, trees and flowers, as well as the marine environment, geology, astronomy, general wildlife, as well as children's nature. And as with all of our talks, any of the books that are available are either available through Straight Nature or at the Kirstenbosch bookshop. And then, as I said, my name is Brett from Room to Grow. I'm the owner of Room to Grow. We're an exterior design and project management company that's been designing and creating outdoor living spaces in and around Cape Town since 2002. We offer a complete suite of landscape design, construction, and associated design elements for our residential, commercial, and retail clients. And you can find out more about us at our website, roomtogrow.co.za, or follow us on our socials, Room to Grow at Facebook and Room to Grow CPT on Instagram. And then I'm very excited today, and I'm sure you all are too, to have Steve Woodhall come and talk to us. Steve is a butterfly enthusiast and photographer. He started butterfly and moth collecting in the UK at the age of 5 and made the decision to go to Africa after seeing Born Free, and finally made it to South Africa in 1980. He joined the Lepidopterist Society of Africa in 1986, and he served as the president of LEPSOC for nearly 10 years. Steve has authored, contributed, and edited several books, including A Practical Guide to Butterflies and Moths for the Lepidopterist Society of South Africa, The Pocket Guide to Butterflies of South Africa, The Field Guide to Butterflies of South Africa, as well as the app based on the Field Guide. So the Pocket Guide as well as the Field Guide are currently at special at the Kirstenbosch bookshop, and the app is available on iOS and Android. Before I hand over to Steve, I'd just like to remind everybody that while we're having the talk, if you have any questions, to please put those into the Q&A section, and we will get to them at the end, and Steve will answer those. So without further ado, thank you, Steve. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Brett, and thank you, Brett and Belinda, for setting this up. It's exciting, and I'm looking forward to doing it. And good morning, everybody. Welcome to this talk about butterflies, backyards, and biomes. And I think without any further ado, let's climb in. That butterfly you can see on this slide it used to be called the eyed pan. You know, it's called the African blue pansy. Beautiful butterfly that's found all over the old world, if you like. It's even got as far as Europe now, and it's spreading down south to Africa because it keeps switching its host plant. It's found as far east as Japan. It's a beautiful thing. So just go in here now. Just waiting for this slide to change. There we go. Yeah. So here we have a couple of examples of butterflies that we find here where I live. In fact, just anywhere in Southern Africa, if you've got a garden, chances are you'll see these ones. And on the left, you've got the dark blue pansy, Genonia inoni, which feeds on a number of plants in the Acanthaceae. Very common, very widespread, beautiful little thing, black and blue and white on top. And then the tiny little African grass blue, Etheria nisla, that feeds on that little yellow sorrel weed that grows in your lawns. And that's, you can see it there, the peeping wood sorrel. And the male and the female there getting passionate in our lawn. So there's a couple of examples of widespread garden butterflies. First, a few statistics on butterflies and moths. Lepidoptera. There are more than 230,000 species of Lepidoptera worldwide, and 17 to 20,000, depending on what taxonomist you listen to, are classified as what they call Papilionoidea, which are the classical butterflies. And of those, there's over 4,000 species in Africa. And they're what they call holometabolous, means they have a complete metamorphosis. They go from egg. When the egg caterpillar emerges, it feeds, it molts, it grows to full size, forms a chrysalis or pupa, and then the adult butterfly emerges from the pupa and then goes on to mate and then lay eggs, and the cycle goes again. They form one superfamily within the Lepidoptera, alongside 46 others, which are classified as moths. And the taxonomists are arguing about the status of Papilionoida all the time, and they're also arguing about just about everything these days. So it's the field is very active scientifically, and it's great fun to be part of. Just some local statistics in South Africa. There are 675 roughly species of Papilionoida in South Africa. The number keeps going up and down because we keep discovering new ones, and the taxonomists keep reassigning species. Compared, for instance, to 1,800 in Nigeria, and in Cameroon, I think it's closer to 2,500. And of that 675 species, 314 of them are endemic to South Africa. They're found nowhere else in the world. And then using Greater Equatorial as an example, 308 species have been recorded here since records began back in the 19th century. So South Africa punches above its weight for a semi-temperate country. And you might think, why is that? Our savanna and forest biomes they are largely similar to what you get further north, right up into Tanzania and Kenya and so on. But even the forests as well have got a lot in common with some areas of the lowland forest further north. And our grassland, fynbos and karoo biomes are unique to South Africa. They are centers of endemism for plants, and it follows that they're also rich in endemic butterflies and moths too. That's why we have so many endemics. So let's look at Etequini as an example, which is where I live. I lived here since 2005, and I'm fortunate to live in an urban forest called Gillets, where we all take great care to look after our gardens. And here's a couple of examples of local butterflies. The one on the left is a little yellowish Amacosa roxata, which you won't see in your garden unless you're lucky enough to have this lichen-covered sandstone rocks that it lives around. The caterpillars eat lichen, and it's actually a threatened species. IUCN, I think, is that it's near threatened, and it flies near where I live. I know where to go and look for it. But on the other hand, on the other side on the right, we've got a mocha swallowtail, which is extremely widespread all the way through tropical and subtropical Africa. That's a male you can see. The females are very different to the male. They don't have tails, and they come in several different color forms. So that little chap was photographed outside my window here while I'm sitting now. And just to move on. Since we started recording butterflies, there are 308 species of butterfly. And it makes it at the moment, the most biodiverse butterfly plot, or species-rich butterfly plot in South Africa. Here's an example of one I get in my garden, lowland bush beauty, which feeds on grass, particularly the broadleaf brittle grass. And then it's probably because there's been butterfly enthusiasts here right back to the days that Durban was founded. Some of the people that came out here, like Roland Tryman from Britain, to fight in the various wars that have happened here. They're also into butterflies as well, and they were collecting for the museums. And we like bird collectors, we were lots of people here wanting to collect in museums in Europe. And Durban was another example of a local butterfly, the forest queen. That's a male Caraxes wakefieldi. It's a forest queen, even though it's a male. So we tend to refer to that one as the Freddie Mercury butterfly, just Freddie for short. And it feeds on Gene soapberry, which is a very popular local garden plant. And there's 196 species in our suburb where we live, Kloof, which includes several local nature reserves as well as a fairly big national one. It's in Bellows Cranscliffe Nature Reserve. This is a buff-tipped skipper, Abanthus canopus. Again, it's quite numerous around here, and we all see this one. If you've got Gruyere, crossberries in your garden, the chances are this butterfly will turn. It's not a rare one. It's found all over East Africa. In a friend's garden, it lives next to Cranscliffe. He gets 128 species in the garden. That's a fig tree blue, which is one of the most beautiful butterflies we get around here. Caterpillars eat fig leaves and fig fruit. In my garden, which is next to the small repeating nature reserve, I get 118 species of butterfly. And so why are butterflies diversity space so species rich here? Why do we get so many species? Well, it's partly down to luck. We've got a mild climate, ranges from hot subtropical, as we found earlier on this week. It can get really hot here. So where I live, which is more cool, wet escarpment, so it never gets really that hot. We go from sea level to 800-meter elevation across a range of geological substrates, which creates a lot of the basic conditions for biodiversity. It's got tropical, subtropical forest, savanna, and grassland elements all together in a biome called the Indonesian coastal belt, which is a recognized biome. And its result is a mix of widely distributed typical tropical species and endemic local South African species. There's a couple of our local nature reserves there, Kenneth Steenbank down on the coast, and Giba Gorge, which is just up the road in Hillcrest, which is classical KwaZulu-Natal sandstone saarveld, which is an endangered veld type. And we've also in Durban taken a lot of long-term measures to preserve biodiversity. Control of invasive alien plants is a municipal imperative. They've got this DMOS system for the Durban Municipal Open Space System. And also the conservancies here run these events called Open Gardens, where we've been for the past 20 years or more encouraging local people to plant indigenous. And all the parks and riverbeds and roadsides are as much as possible in Durban are kept locally indigenous, getting rid of aliens and planting locally indigenous plants. So if you plant local indigenous plants in your garden, you will get not just the butterflies, but the birds as well. So let's have a look at why we get this diversity. And in ecology, we talk about a thing called the food web. Now, to start off with, in my garden and around here in the bush, we've got a tree called the databerry, Sclerochrotum integerum. And we have this little butterfly here called Boisdevall's treenan, whose caterpillars feed on it. You can see there are 3 females that are having an egg-laying session. They're very gregarious, and you see that one female has laid a raft of eggs. And these emerge to find, you get these little caterpillars which really rapidly defoliate the tree, which gets some gardeners a bit worried, but in actual fact, it helps the tree, prunes it. And then while this is going on, you get these wasps, these little paper wasps that you can see chewing caterpillar up there. And there's another species of wasp which we haven't been able to identify yet, which forms a little cocoon on the tree. We get these big federated stem wasps, which eat caterpillars as well, not the same species. That's a large moth caterpillar it's eating. And that wasp will lay an egg on the caterpillar and put back it into a hole in the ground. And then the caterpillar is still live while the wasp grub eats it. This is actually quite gruesome. Even more gruesome, we have these tarantula wasps, and we have these rain spiders, which also feed on butterflies. But the wasps themselves are preyed on by, the spiders themselves are preyed on by these tarantula wasps, which can, they fight with the spider and inject it with a really nasty venom, which paralyzes the spider, prevents the spider's immune system from killing the wasp egg while it's in there, and the wasp puts it into a burrow, and then later on the adult wasp hatches out. We also have birds like this class of cuckoo, where this is a female, and the males catch caterpillars and feed them to the females as a nuptial gift. And then also we have many other species of insect like these tachinid flies, Pigeonia, which they lay their eggs on the caterpillars. The egg crawls into the caterpillar's breathing openings and eats the caterpillar alive from the inside. And then, of course, we've got other butterflies in the garden, like the garden acria, which is found virtually all over southern Africa. And it's in the same food web. It has the same predators, different host plants. It feeds on Kigaleria africana, the wild peach, but it's part of the same food web. So within this food web, and it's just one little bit, you can think about how many different species of butterfly, species of wasp, spider, bird, and everything we get. It's very complicated, and it actually works quite well. We've got a healthy environment here. So let's have a look at South Africa's biomes and the butterflies we get in the various biomes. And you can see there, we've got 9 biomes here. We've already spoken about the Indonesian coastal belt. Then we've got grassland, savanna, forest, Albany thicket down there in the Southern Cape. Favour, which we all know is very famous, Namakuru, succulent Kuru, and a bit of desert on the Namibian border. And all of these are vegetation determined by the climate, the ocean currents and the winds and how the rainfall. And underlying geology is very important: the soil type, nutrient balance, and also the elevation as well, which also affects the temperatures and the amount of rainfall that you get. Butterflies are mostly herbivores. I say mostly because a few of them aren't. And so it follows that, butterfly biodiversity follows plant biodiversity. So if you've got good plant biodiversity, you will have good butterfly biodiversity. So let's start off looking at grassland. Now, in grassland, dominant vegetation structure is grass, obviously, and there's a grassland butterfly. It doesn't feed on grass. That's a butterfly whose larvae associate with ants. It's a rudiport russet or a tooth russet, which has got its own nature reserve in rudiport. It needs ants. The caterpillars they shelter inside ants' nests, and the caterpillars feed on this little plant called the doll rose, Hermania, which is a widespread grassland plant. Shrubs and trees are scarce, and they tend to be restricted by fire. And the forb species richness is greater than the grass back there. But this butterfly here is a grass feeder that's found in the Widow. It's an endangered species, and it only lives in certain spots in the KZN Midlands. And we don't know exactly what sour grass it feeds on. It needs to be identified. But yeah, they tend to use forbs, specialized grasses, or isolated shrubland species as host plants. Here's another example of a grassland butterfly, the marsh self, which wasn't until recently on the endangered list. So, excuse me, and it's found in the flays around Johannesburg, Potchefstroom, and off into Mpumalanga, where it feeds on wetland grasses. And there's work being done on this butterfly's ecology right now. Many of them are allied to savanna or karoo elements, and this particular butterfly here is a giant cupid, which feeds on a plant called Ocimum babatum, but it also it's a caterpillar, lives inside ants' nests. This is a predator. We know the larvae of this group of Lepidocrysops, they feed on ant larvae inside the ant's nest. So there's a predatory butterfly, and that's not an easy garden subject, obviously. If you're lucky enough to live near a colony, and they'll come and feed on nectar in the garden, and obviously that gives you a responsibility to not do anything to poison them. But yeah, they are specialists. So let's just have a look at a selection of garden butterflies. So this is a meadow white, Poncia halisi. The host plant is peppercress, which is a brassica, a Lephidium species, and it feeds on several species of the family. In fact, I found out at one point it's a pest of the Indian mustard plant, which is very popular around here with gardeners, and the caterpillars eat that. It's related to the cabbage white, which is invading the Cape, but it's not a pest species. If you get it in your garden, please don't hold that food. It's a sign you've got a healthy ecosystem. Here we have a fairly well-known butterfly, the African plain tiger. For a long time, it was known as the African monarch, until we realized that it might look like the African monarch, but it's actually not that closely related to it. And it's maybe about to change its generic name as well. It feeds on anything in the Asclepiads, and particularly this one, Gomphocarpus species, the balloon cottonbush. And again, it's more or less found all over Africa. In fact, there are several different subspecies, but it's an easy garden butterfly. And that plant is common in grassland. So if you've got a garden in the grassland, you know you'll get this butterfly eventually. Another one is the gaudy commodore, which is Octavia, which feeds on spur flowers. It's not restricted to grasslands, but it's particularly common in the grasslands. This one's feeding on a blue haze flower, not far from us in the grassland at Montpellier, which is a winter form, Ormsitimus, very lovely blue and red butterfly. And then you have the summer form, Natalensis, which is found in a similar place but at different times of the year. And these feed on Coleus and Plectanthus, and they're often seen in gardens. Now looking at a couple of more specialized species, we have a table mountain beauty, whose caterpillars feed on grasses, and it's a grassland species that penetrates fame bot and the Graphiamontane areas. So everybody thinks it's a fame bot specialist, but it isn't. It's commoner in the Drakensberg, if you go anywhere in the Lesotho, and even the higher areas of KZN, even around Johannesburg, I've seen it there as well. And it's particularly fond of yellow and orange flowers like this Nipophia, and it's the only pollinator we know of these uniflora on Table Mountain. And if you climb Table Mountain, go up one of the gorges, and when the diesels are flowering, you'll often see them nectaring on them. Another specialized species is the common meadow blue. And this is the one that feeds on the forbs, the leguminous forbs like Vigna and Ariosema. It's a male, he's sitting on a grass stem, showing his beautiful blue wings and flashing his orange and black hind wing markings, which actually are a fake eye, which tends to draw up a potential predator will peck the right end of the butterfly because he thinks he's seen the butterfly's eye. And then here another specialist, the eastern sorrel copper, Laphron clarkii, found in grasslands not so much in the Cape area. There you get different species, a western soil copper. You can see it's a beautiful orange butterfly. It's a more of a wetland specialist. It feeds on rumex, it feeds on polygonum, on wetland plants. It's a grassland butterfly. Now we'll have a look at savanna butterflies. Now the dominant vegetation type here is open woodland or scrubland, but with a lot of grass. The two broad categories, and in one you get these butterflies that feed on sourfelt trees, broadleaf trees with toxic chemicals which are herbivores, and butterflies have evolved to use these chemicals in their defense. Butterflies have been around an awfully long time, since we think the Jurassic. They've had a long time to revolve around what plants have done to defend themselves against mammals. So there's the Pocticaraxes, which is found in the bushveld areas, very common widespread butterfly. Then we have these little orange tips that feed on Caparaceae. And then the back one, sorry, these are also very widespread. And then we got the swordtail, the large striped swordtail, also feeds on a broadleaf plant, custard apple, and an ACI, very widespread in the bushveld, and comes into the high veld as well. And in sweet veld, on the other hand, you get these narrow leaf leguminous trees, used to be called acacias. I'm not going to go down that route. I know it's very controversial, but the caterpillars tend to feed on the protein-rich fresh shoots, and the plants use thorns as a defense against herbivores. And there's a butterfly's caterpillar feeds on Beckelia and Senegalia. And it's also ant-associated, and we've not identified the ants yet. Some butterflies rely on these very high protein plants to speed up their life cycle. And as in grassland, forbs and specialized grasses are important butterfly hosts in savanna. So just to look at some savanna species, this is the well-known one, the pioneer caper white, used to be called the brown-veined white, Melanosa rota, feeds on Boschia and other members of the Caparaceae. It originates in arid semi-desert savanna and migrates nearly everywhere. And it's extremely widespread. It's found all the way across Africa into Madagascar, Arabia, India, as far west as the Himalayas. So it's a very widespread butterfly, and it'll appear in your garden purely because it's migrating. Another garden subject, another one of the Pressis genus. This is Archesia, the garden inspector. And this is the form Archesia, which is the winter form, darker and bluer than the summer form. Also feeds on spur flowers. And that one that's a summer form Pelasgus. Remember, the gaudy commodore also has two forms. It's closely related. Now we have the more specialized species. You get these Caraxes, these beautiful, big, flashy, very sought after by butterfly watchers. They don't usually come to nectar. They're fonder of rotten fruit or even things like animal droppings. This particular one feeds on Fabaceae like Pterocarpus and Dalbergia. We also get a lot of these orange tips are classical savanna butterflies. This one is found virtually everywhere in South Africa, north of Victoria, down into Mozambique and the drier areas. A very widespread species. It's found as far afield as Spain. We have this joker, the African joker, Iblia anvatara, feeds on creeping nettle, which is found in some of the grassland areas too, but it's more of a savanna butterfly. And then we have these beautiful purple tips. This particular one is a bushveld purple tip, got a mating pair here. The caterpillars feed on Caparaceae or caper, and they are, you can see that the male has got those beautiful orange tips to his wing, purple tips to his wings, and they're iridescent. They change color from magenta to blue, and they're unique to Africa. You don't find those anywhere else. And the female of his mating web, you can see from through the wings, has got an orange tip to the wing. There are several forms of female. Some of them got black tips and orange tips. And this one is found in Durban. You don't find it so much, but once you get up into the Together Valley, it becomes quite common. And it's found all over Africa, right up as far as Senegal, as far as Ethiopia, right up through the tropics. So let's have a look at forest now. It's the smallest of our biomes, and such is highly fragmented, possibly due to human activities over a long period, but also because of the way that our climate works. Fires are not man-made naturally; they're set by lightning. Typical of forests is you've got a closed canopy. It's found on deep nutrient-rich soils, and there's two broad categories. You've got lowland forests on the northeast coast, where you find butterflies like this, the gold-banded forester near from, which like the forest queen we saw earlier, feeds on Divolia. And this butterfly in South Africa tends to be only found up in Maputo, northern KZN. And this little Zulu yellow buff, which is one of these butterflies that feeds on lichen, it doesn't feed on leaves at all, also found in lowland forest. And then you have escarpment Afromontane forest, which is found up to 2,100 meters high elevation, normally in the rain shadows rainy side of mountains. And this is an example of a butterfly that's found in these forests. It's the bush kite swallowtail, Euphenor. That's the only swallowtail that's endemic to South Africa. It's found nowhere else in South Africa. And it feeds on Cryptocarya species. And there it's particular plant is feeding on those, one of the forest flowering plants, I think it's Calpurnia. And then we have these Caraxes in the forest as well. There's particular one, the forest king, also got a broader range of host plants, including Cryptocarya. This one's feeding on some butterfly bait, which we smeared onto a tree trunk, and he's come along and he's drinking it. These ones tend not to feed on flowers. They're like a high energy fruit and things like that. The vegetation of the forest and butterflies are linked to similar forests further north. Zipheres, you find right up into West Africa, something like 40 different subspecies, all found on high altitude forests all over Africa. Afromontane forest, it's got more endemics, it's more fragmented with fine dominated grassland elements. And it's also found at lower elevations as you go further south. So the Nizla forest is Afromontane, it's not coastal like forests in KZN. So let's have a look at some forest butterflies. Well, easy garden butterflies. This is a narrow green banded swallowtail. I think it's been found as far south as Port Elizabeth now. Feeds on various Rutaceae, so citrus, lemon trees, and also Pepris and cedar, Clerodendron. It feeds on many species of local Rutaceae. Then we have these little browns, the black-haired bush brown, Hibicus, feeds on grasses, and a very popular ground cover in gardens is Opis minuscertellus, the Vatican grass. And if you live in my area, that turns up on its own accord, and the butterflies are very common. Brown butterflies are very widespread, but this one is found in South Africa, found further north as well. Another widespread forest butterfly, which is easy to get in your garden, is a mother of pearl. It's a very popular insect, beautiful iridescent upper side. And this photograph, it looks white, but as it flies around, it flashes gold and green and purple. Feeds on Acanthaceae, specifically the Phorlopsis and Acistasias, the creeping foxgloves and the fairy stars. And then again, Caraxes. In this area, very easy to get in your garden. Feeds on Alophilus, false currants. And it's a very confiding butterfly to come and sit on the edge of your woodland area and sit and watch you and look at you. And if it sees another Caraxes flying around, it'll chase it away and it'll come back. Then we have the more specialist forest species. There are hundreds of them. The forests are the most biodiverse areas for butterflies. And this is an example of a Pieridae, a white butterfly, a large vagrant. It's a female. The male's more of a pale green, plain color up top. Feeds on long-stalked paddlepod, one of the jasmine family. And yeah, it's found, I think, as far south as the Eastern Cape. This like Dweza, and if you've got a garden near a forest, probably will turn up in your garden. It loves nectar, so it can plant ribbon flowers and things like that, it will turn up. Then we have our biggest butterfly, the emperor swallowtail, Ophidicephalus, of which there are several subspecies. Its main host plant is horsewood, Glossida anisata. And again, if you go into the forest like Mkandla, the more high altitude forests as well, then you'll see these huge beasties flying up and down and nectaring and sitting on the tops of trees. And again, if you've got a garden near a forested area, then you'll see them in your garden. One of the most brightly coloured butterflies you get in the forest are these false acreas. This is when I talked about mimics earlier on, where you get butterflies that are toxic and advertise the fact by being brightly red coloured. This one feeds on milk plums, Erythlophytum, and it's quite widespread in the forest. I get it in my garden, and anywhere around this area, if you go into the natural areas, you see them. A lot of people have milk plum in their garden, so they get this butterfly and its relatives in the gardens. Now let's move down into the karoo, which is unique to Southern Africa. And there's two main types of karoo. There's the Nama karoo, which is on the arid central plain of South Africa. And its main vegetation there is xeric, dry, low shrubland with a few specialized grasses and low trees, and many succulents. And you get caraxes there as well. That's particular one, Jalusa, which is found in the savanna areas, but the dominant subspecies was described from the karoo, where it feeds on jacket plum, Piapic capensis. And then you have succulent karoo, which is on the wetter area in the western part, the west coast of the hinterland of escarpments. It's extremely arid, semi-desert shrubland, and its main vegetation is succulents of the Azoaceae, Bacches basically, and Crasulaceae stone crops. And a lot of butterflies actually feed on the nectar of those, and you get a lot of butterflies there which don't feed on plants entire life history. This particular one here is a beautiful azure opal, Chrysoanthus azureus, found in the areas around Sutherland and in the Coa belt, and the caterpillars are associated with ants, but they also feed on plants like rupera. And this one you've got to go to see. This one you've got to go into the specialist there. Not easy to find. You've got areas of specialized grassland, and in there you get these butterflies like the macro spring widow, whose caterpillars feed on grasses. In spring, these butterflies can fly in huge numbers, and there are many species of them as well. So this particular one's found in the macroland, but you do find other species in the Nama karoo and the favour. Both the karoo areas have got specialized swarm species, and the butterflies tend to be similar to the ones you find in other karoo areas, and also in desert, favour, and savanna to a lesser extent as well. This particular one is a butterfly that we don't think feeds on plants at all. We know that it found in caterpillars have been found in nests of the ants Chromatogaster, Melanogaster. But it's quite widespread in the karoo, and its life history at the moment is not fully known. And we call aphytophagi and myrmecophagi. Now, those terms have got meanings. Aphytophagi just means doesn't eat plants, non-plant eating, and myrmecophagi means it loves ants, loves them to the point of eating them sometimes. But that's what the terms mean. And you'll hear butterfly people talk about that quite a lot. So looking at some of the easy garden subjects in the karoo, well, one is the most widespread butterfly in the world, the painted lady, which is, it's just found virtually everywhere. And if you've got a garden in the karoo and the fame are fairly low in easy garden subjects. So this particular butterfly can be very common in the karoo. It feeds on a lot of the plants that grow wild there, like gazanias, arctotis, and it also feeds on invaders like Scottish thistle as well. And then the African clouded yellow, which feeds on Medicago sativa, lucerne, and many other wild legumes that are found in those areas, and often found on farms where people grow lucerne for their horses. And it was thought to be a pest at one point, but it isn't. It won't harm the lucerne crop, and it's actually quite scarce in South Africa now. It used to be very common around Joburg, but it's not seen that much anymore now. But people who live in the karoo do often see them in their gardens. Then we get the specialized species, of which there are many. This is one of the most spectacular. This is a butterfly called the king copper, Tylopedes sardonyx, and it feeds on plants, but it's attended by ants in their nests. Aspalathus, which is rooibos and honeybush, are members of that genus, and also Euclea as well, like we can see this one, Euclea undulata. And believe it or not, I know somebody in the karoo who gets this butterfly in her garden. I know she may be even here this morning yet. She always posts pictures on her Facebook page of this butterfly feeding on flowers in her garden. So yeah, if you've got a garden near the karoo, you'll get karoo butterflies in your garden. Another specialist, this one here, I don't think you'll ever find this in your garden. This is a female. You can see there she's laying a couple of eggs on a dry piece of grass. And this is a butterfly called a scolly, Roggebird scolly, Pestopringlii. And we don't know the life history of this one. We know they're found in areas that are almost completely free of plants. And you've got these Mulmiakis, pugnacious ants, Anopolypus custodians. And we know that some of this genus, we found the caterpillars inside the ants' nests. And we also know, as we've watched them do it, the ants actually feed the caterpillars mouth to mouth, just like a cuckoo with a baby bird. But what they actually do, we don't know. And it's important to look after them because we don't know enough about their ecology and how to preserve them. We also get some pretty spectacular butterflies in the karoo. This is a succulent karoo special, the mackerel silver line. Sigarides novacuus. And we know the caterpillars feed on this Tesserina retrofracta, Val Doring. This is a female. Females are orange and black on top, the males are beautifully blue. And that looks very, very conspicuous, but that silvery coloration is dazzle coloration. It breaks up its outline against the background and protected. So now let's look at some favour butterflies. Favour is almost synonymous with the Cape Floral Kingdom, which is one of the richest in the world and one of the smallest, or if not the smallest. Like the Karoo, it's got very varied geology and soil, even more so because you've got the Cape supergroup coming in on the coast and a higher rainfall than the Karoo biomes, very high biodiversity. And the main vegetative elements are 4 proteoids, ericoids, osteoids, and geophytes. And you get pyraxes there as well. This particular one feeds on a lot of these specialized plants you get down there, Raphnia, Calhoun, Hypercalyptus, and so on. And it's found, you can often find the caterpillars in this most leaf pass, and you find the adults sitting on proteus on top of the mountains. Very closely related to the savanna species, the foxy Caraxes that we saw earlier, and that's Caraxes pileus, which is a famous butterfly. You get these specialized forbs in Fabaceae, Asteraceae, Rhamnaceae, and then you get these spectacular little butterflies like the Uranus opal, which is found on top of the mountains in places like the Toistooth Pass, Franschhoek. You've got to climb a mountain to see this butterfly, and it's got this lovely iridescent fugitive blue over a silvery blue background. The Rhinocephalt is dominated by Asteraceae, and you get butterflies that feed on those tend to be real specialists. This is a famous butterfly that David Piro. It's actually quite numerous in the Cape, and people who've got Phylica growing nearby and saxifrage, you actually will get these ones coming into your garden if you're very lucky. And as in Karoo, you've got specialized rattlets or rain-restricted butterflies. So we have these veined widows, Tauronesis, which feeds on these tenaculated grasses, which used to be called Myrtlewoodera. And these ones are very well distributed across places like the Cape Peninsula, and also in the Karoo areas as well. And they do show major similarities to the Karoo species and others from Savannah and grassland. So let's have a look at what you find in the favours in your garden as well. The citrus swallowtail is an example. It's found all over Africa, really, south of the Sahara, and in the Cape. And mainly it uses citrus, which is why it's called the citrus swallowtail. But down in the Cape and in Karoo, there are certain plants in the Apiaceae, like Devera, that's the plant when if you touch it, you get a sunburn. And it also feeds on that as well as citrus. So it's a butterfly you often see on the flowers in your garden. Then you have this one, which is the Western Cape Alton Widow, which feeds on grasses as a larva, various ones, including good old cuckoo. I've seen them swarming around cuckoo patches in the Cape. This is a Diaroclitus. It's an interesting butterfly because it's a member of a group of brown butterflies, which is incredibly ancient. Its closest relatives are found in places like South America and India. It's not close related to brown butterflies you find further north in Africa and Europe. It's quite distantly related. Then we have some real specialists. Those of you who live in Cape Town may have heard of what used to be called the lion's head copper. It's been renamed now as a scarce silver spotted copper. But that is, we don't really know what the host plant is, or even if it feeds on plants, because one of the people doing research on it found that it was actually fed by ants within the ant's nest. It's extinct on the Cape Peninsula, misspelled peninsula there, and Pearl Mountain, but it's still found down in places like Duhook Nature Reserve and so you still can see these. Then a very rare butterfly from the Cape area, from the Peninsula area, is the Cape Freckled Ranger, which has now got its own specialist nature reserve down in the Strandfontein area, where the people from Cape Nature are doing a really good job of looking after it. It's an endangered subspecies of butterfly called Trita barbari, which is found in grasslands as far north as Limpopo. But this particular one is a little subspecies only found in the Western Cape. So why are some butterflies common and widespread? Like the painted lady, there's its life history, they're getting ready to mate, the egg, and then also you've got the caterpillar, which has got a very wide spread food plant, and the chrysalis, which looks like a piece of polished brass. There's a cardui, is what they call euiecious. It's got a very, very wide range of habitat. can live in different conditions all over, feed on many plant species. It's a strong flyer. It migrates readily. There's the main host plant in sort of subtropical Africa, which is Berkea pinnatinata. It's a thistle, but also you can see Gazane is Arctotis, and even things like the thistle and Morogo, Malva parviflora, one of the plants that is very often eaten by people in Africa. In the Malvaceae, also used by them. That's one end of the spectrum. Then you look at rare and endangered butterflies, and now we've got a very sad and cautionary tale here. This is the Brenton blue, Orochrysops. Used to be called the Brenton blue. It's called the Brenton cupid now. Orochrysops niobe, which was only known from one spot, very stenoecious. Reason why it's stenoecious, it can only live in a very restricted range of habitats. And this butterfly was in an evolutionary dead end. It lives up, this is its entire range of its existence was in Brenton-on-Sea. And that person lived in the house next door to the reserve, did get them in their garden. And that little path you can see in front of you is where the males used to display. And I took the photographs there about 10, 15 years ago. And a friend of mine was the custodian of the reserve. It required an ant, a host plant, shady trees, a place for the ants to live. Very complicated. You needed to have these candlewood trees. You can see there. My friend Dave Edge was the custodian. And you take one of those away, like that 2017 fire in Neisner. That's the other end of the spectrum. You needed that Indigofera erecta, which is the host plant. You needed Campanacus bainii. You needed a particular aphid. That Indigofera had to have a certain Indigofera or Fabaceae. They have nodules on their roots that fix nitrogen, and the caterpillar used to eat those nodules, and then the aphids used to suck the plant's roots, and the ants used to milk the aphids, and they lived in tunnels in the candlewoods. When the candlewoods got burnt, it was bye-bye butterfly, and it disappeared. And it hasn't been seen now since before. So I think 2018, we saw a couple of adults, butterflies flying around, but there weren't any ants for them to be protected by, so it hasn't been seen since. Very sad story. So people say, why don't I see so many butterflies these days? Well, there are places where you still can see plenty of butterflies, like in Zululand, with this lowland begonia is just going crazy with butterflies, right next to the road. People stop and say, oh, look at that. We're fortunate we've still got many wild areas in Africa. But if you Google insect apocalypse, and this is down in Durban, June Soapberry, another butterfly magnet. Examples, the long article in PLOS One, a single culprit known as neonicotinoids and neonics accounts for a 92% reduction in insect numbers and biodiversity in the past 20 years. And the clear and alarming link between the climate crisis and high-intensity agriculture show that in places where the impacts are particularly high, insect abundance has dropped by nearly 50%, and the number of species has gone down by 27%. That's a fairly recent study that was published in 2022. And then recently, there was a catastrophic collapse in a moth called the begong moth in Australia. And that was years of decline based on agricultural practices, but the fires they had in Australia recently wiped it out. It's on the verge of extinction from being a very common insect. Gardens don't need to be biodiversity deserts. There's no pressure to mine, there's no pressure to grow food, only to find a way to live sustainably and well. So, how do you manage your ecosystem? What can you do to help? This is my garden, just after it's been planted with locally indigenous plants. So, one thing is, should I rewild, which is a thing these days. You've got to learn to trust Mother Nature and learn how your garden is part of a larger ecosystem, not just what you find in your garden, but what's found around or in your suburb, in your province, in your city. And this is where there's an initiative called Cities Nature Challenge and the BioBlitzes, which are run by Sandy, and they're run on iNaturalist, which is a very, very good international citizen science platform, which allows you to register everything that you see around you. Send the photographs in. It will go into a huge database, which is curated very carefully, and they're using it to measure biodiversity around the world and find ways of measuring how cities and companies and people are actually looking after their biodiversity. It's all being measured. And it's a hot thing now. The COP15 conference that was held in Montreal late last year was very, very engaged with this. Butterflies and moths are useful indicators because they're visible. If you can see a lot of butterflies and moths, you know you've got good biodiversity. As are their predators, wasps and birds and flies and spiders. And butterflies are motile. They can fly and disperse. They can get around. If you create the right conditions in your garden, they will come. So what can you do? Well, first of all, find out what your city or town or city is doing to protect its biodiversity and associated ecosystem services. And that's very, very topical in South Africa right now. Align yourself, get involved, register for the Cities Nature Challenge, start getting involved in biomes. It's been, we're actually, when I say we, I'm actually championing the Durban Cities Nature Challenge, City Nature Challenge, try and get as many people to register. In Cape Town at the moment, Western Cape is the one that gets the highest numbers. I think the last one, they got something like 17,000 records, and Durban got just under 8,000. So I'm going to be hoping Durban can start to compete now. Also, you can avoid planting monocultures. Farmers essentially invented monocultures. When farming started, people planted huge numbers of fruit trees or grasses like wheat, and then it excluded all the other plants. And what they do is there's one that people plant, that's clivius, which normally grows in forests at a very low density. They attract pests like this little moth, British crinny, which is only behaving naturally. The females find the host plant by scent. The more plants you have, the more chances are the moth will find it. The moth is not an alien. It's a very widespread moth, like the painted lady. It's found all over the old world. Wherever anybody grows, anybody growing amaryllis, not just clivias, will attract this moth. Crop farming is all about monocultures, and pests are merely concentrations of consumers in the trophic pyramid. All the trophic pyramid means is you've got this, at the bottom you've got the soil and the rocks, which provide nutrients. You've got water and air, and plants photosynthesize. They then produce sugars, and caterpillars come along and eat the leaves, and they build proteins. So your butterflies and moths are what they call primary consumers. They're the bottom of the food chain. And then, see, monocultures are not balanced ecosystems. You don't get a wide range of primary consumers. And all the creatures like spiders and flies and wasps and birds are all consumers at various levels, right up to your apex predators like crowned eagles, which feed on monkeys, which feed on birds' eggs, which also feed on insects and plants as well. So if you've got a monoculture, you're already, hampering your biodiversity. And also, of course, don't use pesticides. As we saw earlier on, the use of particularly these modern pesticides like neonicotinoids and pyrethroids. You've got to trust the ecosystem to find its balance. If you've got a large number of caterpillars in your garden and you don't put pesticide on them, eventually a wasp species will come along and start preying on them. Some birds eat them. I know people believe that birds don't eat the British crinny, the Amaryllis borer, but birds do eat them. So what is rewilding? How do you go about doing it? Well, it's already a big thing overseas. Rewilding Britain is one that's going on there. When I wrote this, there were 73 member projects of 113,000 hectares of land in rewilding. And also we're looking at rewilding the sea as well. And taken to its extreme, it's attempting to return cultivated land to its original wild state. Mass destruction of biodiversity to support agriculture and mining and urbanization has been happening for centuries, in fact, millennia. Started in the Middle East. And we know now that a lot of these early civilizations died out because they simply wore out their bit of land, denuded it of nutrients, affected the local climate, and it became a desert. So it's been happening for a long time. And unfortunately for us now, it's happening on a global scale. Reversing this is a major undertaking. You've got rewilding Britain in the US, and in Britain, in the UK, and in the US, you've got the Pollinator Partnership, which is government sponsored. And it's encouraging people to plant pollinator-friendly yards all over America. For farmland, the challenge is to retain productivity whilst fulfilling the COP15 30-30 goal. So farmers and in fact companies all over the world are being encouraged to do what they can to aid biodiversity. And the well-known example in the UK is in Nepcastle Estate in southwest England. That's a picture of it from the air, where they've taken farmland and allowed it to go wild. And they've got cows and pigs and all sorts of mammals which are bred for food, alongside wild animals like red deer, living in natural environments that don't use pesticides. And that's what it looks like now. So let's have a look at the UN's Biodiversity Conference, COP15. There's the graphic that came out in its plenary document, and the current status: loss of biodiversity jeopardizes human well-being, as we know, sustainable development. It's difficult to run a fair society when you're taking all the resources out of it and concentrating them and using for something that Mother Nature doesn't intend them to be used for. So the mission is to find ways, tools and solutions of reducing the threats and meeting people's needs at the same time. And you have these various milestones which they're working towards now in terms of ecosystems, meeting humans' needs, equitable sharing of benefits, and also how to do it. The eventual vision is to live in harmony with nature. So, as was said by Inga Anderson, the UN Under Secretary General and the United Nations Environment Programme leader at COP15, is that nature and biodiversity is dying of definitely. I'm not going to read it out to you, but you can see what it says there. This has got global support. In terms of target 3 of the 2030, 30% of globally of land areas and sea areas need to be conserved through effectively well-managed systems of protected areas. And that's happening in South Africa, as we saw now in Durban and in the Western Cape. All over the place, people are doing this. Our governments are sponsoring the new Biodiversity Act, white paper we just come out. It's based on a lot of work that's been done in the past 20, 30 years to monitor our biodiversity and get a baseline measure of how it actually is. So, where can you go to learn about butterflies and moths? This is where I do a little bit of unashamed plugging. The second edition of my field guide of butterflies and moths of South Africa is out. It's been out since the beginning of the pandemic. We launched it on the first month of 2020. And so that's been out for now 2015, the first edition came out. So now it's been out for 3 years, and you can get it any bookshop, and it's on special now. We have gardening for butterflies, which I did this book with Lindsay Gray. I know Lindsay's listening. We did this. We took my garden and we basically rewilded it, and we looked at butterflies and moths. What do you get there? And then we took it around the whole of Southern Africa. If you have a garden anywhere in South Africa, be it in the Karoo, be it in the fynbos, the Savannah, whatever it is, what you can do to get butterflies into your garden. And then from the butterfly book, we produced this app, which is available on the iPhone and on Android as well. And you can go in there, you can use it to identify any butterfly that you see. And you can also use it as a citizen science tool. There's a My List that you can use. And if you're a member of the Lepidoptera Society, you can send your lists to the president, who puts them into a database. So you can actually use it as a biodiversity monitoring tool. And I think with that, that's it. Thank you very much for listening. Now, looking for the questions.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was a visual feast and a lot of information, and just so fascinating to see so many species and the diversity that exists within this biome. It's fantastic. Thank you for sharing all of your passion and knowledge with us. I will go over to questions now. We've got one from Jill van der Veen. She said she'd like to know, what is the purpose of the wasp in nature?
Wow. Well, I suppose with any creature, you say its purpose is just to exist. What wasps do, as I showed in that slide earlier, they're a vital link in the food chain. They're incredible little predators, and they're also pollinators as well. Adult wasps don't feed on caterpillars. You often see them chewing caterpillars up, but they're doing that to feed into their grubs and their nest. They actually feed on nectar, so they're like butterflies and moths and bees. They perform a wonderful pollination service. They're pollinators. If it wasn't for the pollinators, we wouldn't have crops. So that's one thing that wasps do. They also keep down the number of caterpillars in your garden. If it wasn't for wasps, you'd be overwhelmed by them. And nature's numbers control strategies. That's what wasps do.
Fantastic. There we go. And then Lindsay Gray wanted to ask Steve, can you remind everybody how the species count went up once you had redone your garden?
Oh yeah, I mean, we used to get from this garden. we used to get about probably 50 or 60 species of butterfly in here. So since we did it up and went indigenous, now we're up to 118 species now. Noticed a change most during the pandemic when I was stuck at home and all I had to do was walk outside every now and again and count butterflies. But yeah, the number of butterflies you get, the minute you go locally indigenous and you have the locally indigenous plants in your garden, host plants as well as nectar plants, it's important, as we say in our book, if you're going to attract butterflies, nectar, any flowering plant, even an exotic, I blush to say, will attract butterflies. But if you want them to stick around, you've got to have something for the larvae to eat.
Another one here from Carolise Janssen. Could you tell us about butterflies feeding on cyanobacteria?
Cyanobacteria. Yes, we had one of those earlier on in the talk. A couple of them, in fact. We had that little Zulu yellow buff and that rock sitter as well. They feed on lichens, and lichens are a symbiotic a symbiosis between a fungus, an alga, and a cyanobacterium. There are two protists and a fungus living together. And lichen chemistry is amazing. We're finding out from research being done in America, you can have one particular species of lichen, which is a combination of a fungus and an alga, and it can have a different cyanobacterium. And we know that if there's one cyanobacterium, it becomes incredibly toxic and it'll kill people. Another cyanobacterium, and it becomes edible. Now, we know that the rock sitters specifically concentrate on rocks that have got red lichen, and that red lichen has got a particular cyanobacterium living in it. The cyanobacterium is not really a bacterium, so it's an early photosynthesizer. It's one of the oldest life forms on Earth. It's been going for cyanobacteria have been around for billions of years. They're responsible for virtually all the change that happened in the early Earth. And these butterflies actually feed on them as caterpillars. And yeah, so butterflies have been around a very long time. And you know, we don't know how long these butterflies have been around. The chances are when they first evolved, they didn't feed on plants.
Sure, interesting. Thank you. And then another one here from Gerda Theron. Is there an iNaturalist project cataloging butterfly host plants so we could add observations?
Yes, there's something there. I should have put that as a link, actually. If you go onto Facebook and look the Caterpillar Rearing Group Africa, that's run by a lady here in Durban called Sultana Bradley. She might be here, but she's got a workbook thing. But what they're doing there is the Caterpillar Rearing Group is one of the most incredible projects that NEPSOC has done. The guy who was president before me, Herman Staudy, he's writing a book on moths with Strake right now, which has been happening for the last 20 odd years. I believe it's soon to be published. And that book will show you all about the moths. And Herman realized when he started writing this, we knew nothing about what the caterpillars eat. Most of the time, we had no idea what the moth caterpillars were because there were something like 20 times as many moths as there are butterflies anyway. So if you find a caterpillar in your garden, chances are only 5% that it's a butterfly. Most people haven't got a clue what it is. So he started a competition with prizes where he encouraged people all over Africa to start, if you find a caterpillar, photograph it and observe it, and then observe what it's eating, all its behavior. And they started off putting the data into his own database, but now they're starting to use iNaturalist. And iNaturalist have got these interaction databases where you can actually say, okay, we've got this caterpillar and it's interacting by eating this particular plant. So yeah, you could do that. And it's in its infancy, but someone's doing it already. And you can actually, if you go into iNat and just have a look for the Caterpillar Rearing Group, go onto Facebook, join Caterpillar Rearing Group Africa, and then Sun will show you all about how to do this. It's incredibly popular, particularly with ladies. We found it's almost like the mothering instinct is kindled because people love caterpillars. Take it over from silkworms completely.
Fantastic. Thank you, Belinda. I see Belinda has put the link in the chat box there for anybody who wants to copy that and make note of that. And then Carla was asking, did I understand correctly that the clivia worm must not be killed? They seem to sow destruction. I think that might be referring to the one that's attacking our agapanthus also. Is that the bollworm?
There's a different species attacks Liliaceae, attracts a different kind of moth, but they do the same thing. They burrow down into the stems. They don't actually kill the plant. They might kill the plant, but they do not kill the bulbils on the ground. And the plant will sprout back. But I didn't say you can't kill them. I understand. What we say to people is, don't use pesticides. Do it manually. When you find the egg mass, cut it off, because these are common moths. You won't harm the population by killing them. Cut them off, put them in the rubbish. If you find adult caterpillars, you can drown them. There are some chemicals, not chemicals. There are some physical things you can do, like, for instance, you can spray them with a solution of dishwashing liquid with a little bit of canola oil emulsified into it, which is not. It's not that dangerous. You've got to thoroughly wet the caterpillars. It actually drowns them. They can't breathe if they get that on their skin. So that's probably the sort of most sustainable way of controlling them, apart from plucking them off and drowning them. Yeah. So of course, we don't want people to lose their plants, but if you don't have them too heavily concentrated in your garden, you'll probably find the wasps and the bees and so on will do the job for you.
Interesting. Good. And then a question here from Tom. He says, we found cutworms eating the roots of an acacia seedling I was trying to grow. Do the cutworms come from butterfly or moth larvae? And this is from Wolseley in the Fynbos area.
Yeah, they're specifically, it's a family of moths called the Noctuidae, and it's the bollworms and cutworms are all members of that genus, and they Spodoptera. I think Cicada spends a lot of time breeding various noctuids, because there's lots of different species of them. And yeah, it is a pain when you planted some new plants, because the caterpillars are fossorial. They live in the ground and they eat the roots. They don't eat the coal, the actual vegetative part of the plant above the ground. They eat the roots. So you've got this plant that you think is healthy and suddenly falls over and it's gone. And there's a nice little caterpillar sitting there, which generally engenders rage in the gardener, who then promptly squashes the caterpillar. And by the time it's got to that size, it's probably, all you're doing is killing it. I mean, it would normally form a pupa in the ground and then fly away as a moth. And yeah, I must be honest, they are a pain. Again, the best way to keep them under control is to make sure you've got a healthy secondary consumer population in your garden. There's plenty of predators around to reduce their numbers. And that's not just wasps, because you get predators in the ground as well, like centipedes prey on those things. Any ground living predator, spiders particularly, are very fond of those caterpillars. They can smell them on the ground and they can catch them.
Fantastic. Okay, that's it. A holistic approach rather than a simple solution.
Definitely, yeah.
And then we've got an anonymous attendee who's got a two-part question here. Can you give details about butterfly bait, and then also recommend a few butterfly nectar plants?
Okay, well, bait is actually very simple. I mean, at its crudest, even dog droppings can attract Caraxes. I see them often in my garden. But if you want to do it deliberately and you don't want a horrible smell, what we normally say to people is very simple. It's just fermented fruit. In fact, bananas are allowed to go brown, and when they start to leak, strip the skins off, add a little bit of cheap alcohol and a bit of sugar, and then you can either smear that on a tree trunk or on a rock in your garden, or if you look on the Lepsop website, there are instructions on how to build a thing that works a bit like a lobster trap. They can get in, but they can't get out. It doesn't do them any harm. They just get inside and have a free meal. But I find it's fine just to put a piece of tree bark on the ground and smear some bait on it and watch. So yeah, that's butterfly bait. And then nectar plants, depends on where you are. There are certain plants which are better than others. Probably around here, cat's whiskers, clerodendron gladwin's very good. Venonias, generally with daisy family, short corolla flowers, things like the Distephanus and Venonia are often the best nectar plants. And also, sadly, so there are certain invasive aliens. There are one or two plants which are not invasive, which will attract butterflies. But we always like to say to people, make sure you've got some indigenous plants. Tiny effulgens, coral senecio is very good. One of the best ones of all, of course, is the little leadwort, Plumbago auriculata, which is very widespread, grows all over South Africa, even as far as England. And that, when it flowers, it gets those masses of blue flowers, and the butterflies go for it big time. So that's another good one to use. Our book, Gardening for Butterflies, has got a lot of references to what nectar plants you can use.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Steve. And then I've got a question just about migrating butterflies. Am I correct that it's the life cycle of the butterfly that allows it to migrate? So it's the same butterfly that migrates. It's not migrating and laying eggs and moving along as different adults. It's the same adult that moves from one place to another, and then continues the life cycle. What allows a butterfly to migrate?
It's multi-generational. In the ones that we've studied, it's multi-generational. You get the adults, well, like the American monarch and the painted lady are the two best known ones. In fact, the painted lady is still being, in fact, they're both being, intensively studied around the world. And the painted lady, we know, is now a more intensive migrant than the monarch. It goes all the way from tropical Africa to Northern Europe, even at Iceland. And it does it over several generations. It goes in one direction at one time of the year and comes back in the other direction. And then the American monarch starts off with a sedentary generation in Mexico, which overwintered in pine trees. In spring, they lay eggs on the local plants and the offspring go north. And then their daughters and sons go north until they get to northern Canada. And then their daughters and sons start, in the second half of the year, start coming south. And the painted lady does the same thing, so it's multi-generational. However, there were some moths, like the death's head hawk moth and the convolvulus hawk moth, and also a dragonfly, Pantala fluorescens, I think it is, which we think goes all the way across the world in one generation. Certainly with dragonfly, we know that one starts off in Africa and flies across the Indian Ocean to Siberia, where it's preyed on by the Amur falcon. They know this because they've found, falcons get shot by so-called sportsmen. And they do a post-mortem, they find the dragonflies in their gut. And the same thing goes with hawk moths. So we don't see them migrating because it's in the middle of the night. On more than one occasion, I've been up a big mountain like Maribskop or one of the mountains in the Midlands in the middle of the night, and all of us running a moth trap. You just run a mercury vapor light, the moths will come along. And you get so many moths that the light becomes completely blank by them. You can't see anything. And we know that these moths start off in southern Africa, where the caterpillars feed on things like sweet potato, convolvulus, and then they go north, and they end up in Europe. We know that, where they tend to be more widely dispersed and quite rare. I remember as a boy in England, I used to dream of finding a death's head hawk moth or a convolvulus hawk moth. Now they're common down here, but they're not so common in Europe. They migrate. So migration is incredibly important. We now know that the birds follow the butterflies. There's a guy called Gerard Pereira who's doing work on the painted lady, and he's been down to the Sahel where the painted ladies were in their countless billions, and all around him were warblers and little spinnies and little insect-eating birds which have migrated south from Europe, feeding up. And they know from the position of the sun in the sky, the rains, they know when the food's going to be there. And of course, in the opposite direction, the butterfly moves south as well. We still don't know what the link is between the northern and the southern populations. That's what Gerard's working on now. And I think that's why you get the odd bird that gets confused, follows the wrong bunch of painted ladies, like the lesser white thread that was found here recently, comes all the way south and thinks, where am I now? And it happens in the northern hemisphere as well. So we know that the biodiversity, it's one massive global ecosystem.
Oh, that's fascinating. Steve, thank you so very much. We've got no more questions there. It just leaves me to the end to say thank you so much for, again, sharing your knowledge, sharing your passion. All the links are in the chat group here. The talk will be made available as a recording through the various channels. And so I'd like to just thank you once again for your time.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Belinda. It was really good. Yeah.
And thank you to Kathy and Belinda and the rest of the team behind the scenes.
And Kathy, yes.
Yeah, and to close off, just to remind everybody that our next talk will be Willie Olivier on hiking trails of Southern Africa, which will be the 1st of March. And we look forward to seeing many of you there again. Enjoy the rest of the day and have a fantastic week further. We'll see you in a month. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.